Barıгызга da selam. Bu Marcel aka Tatar Prince hem Modern Tatar Identity podcastına hoş geldiniz. Bugünkü konağımız Helen Faller, antropolog, yazıcı hem Tatarstan Universiteti turunda kitap avtoru. Bu epizod ko'pincha inglizcha, ama birinchi 12 minut tatarcha. Tatar o'lishida biz Helen bilan aning ishi hem tatar tili bilan bog'lanishi turida so'zlashdik. Anglizcha aning tekshirinulari turida. Sizning uchun qiziqli bo'lur deb ishonam. Hem hozir men ingliz tilini ko'sham. Hi everyone, my name is Marcel, aka Tatar Prince, and welcome to the Modern Tatar Identity podcast. This podcast is my personal project dedicated to exploring Tatar identity through the conversations with various people who dedicated their life to some extent to Tatarlık, Tatar tili, and studying what all of that means to us. There are not as many episodes in English, but it's really important for me to get your feedback and keep myself motivated to do more, because so far it's me who is involved in the production of this podcast and my friends Bulat and Roland, who are voluntarily helping me. Lots of thanks to them. Today we are having a very interesting conversation with the writer and anthropologist Helen Faller, who is also an author of a famous book, Nation, Language, Islam, Tatarstan Sovereignty Movement. To write that book, Helen learned Tatar and Russian and spent several years in Tatarstan in the 90s. Helen is not just a researcher, but honestly a Tatar җанлы кеше, who being a foreigner managed to go really deep in her exploration of the essence of a Tatar soul. In this podcast, we talked a lot about Helen's work, her motivation, and her experiences connected to Tatarstan. First 10 minutes of our conversation are in Tatar, but you can go directly to English. The time code will be in the description. I hope this conversation will inspire you to check Helen's works, but also to think once again, what is Tatar identity for you? Enjoy the podcast and don't forget to leave comments, put likes, and support us with donations. Көп рахмет сезгә, ләззәтләнеп тыңлагыз. Selam Helen.
Selam Marcel.
Zor rahmet sana kılığın için.
Sana da rahmet.
Helen benim bir yakın dostum. Bir Tatar җанлы кеше.
Rahmet.
Bugün biz finally Helen bilen podcast yazıyız. Hem ayda adından senin turunda belki söyleşiriz. Kimsin sen? Кайдасың сен, кімсің милләт бойынша, һәм нинді бәйләнеш бар сенің һәм татарлар арасында?
Ярар, мен өзім Америкадан келдім. Америкада туғанмын өскеш. Мен татар түгелмін. Ama ben antropolog, ben Tatarstan'da 1,5 yıl boyunca yaşadım. Tatarstan suvereniteti bilen fani hizmet geçirdim.
Ничек син шул Tatar Studies, Tatar History Studies шул темага килдең?
Bu uzak история deyip ben başta Rusya'da yaşadım, Sankt-Peterburg'da demek üniversiteden son Rus dilini söyleşmeyi öğrendim. Benim diplom Rus dili diyen diplom var. Bundan son ben antropoloji aspiranturasına vardım. Bu da resmi. Hem şimdi sıralar millet, til siyaseti, şunday sıralarına kızıksadım. Ama başta Kazakistan'a vardım. Kazakistan'da Almaty'da bu 5 yıldaydı. Men Kazakça söyleşige
öğrendim.
Hem Kazaklar buna cevap verdiler. Мы просто не ожидаем. Şuna göre ben anladım ki şimdi iki tellik sıralar hem milletçilik başka anda big hour bula. Ama Tatarstan'da bu vakıta kişi Tatarca söylese o belki Tatar kişisi bula. Hem şu kere min fani hizmet anda tekrar aladım.
Hem şöyle bulsa şu vakitte 95 yılda mesela Tatarstan'da Kazakistan bilen salıştırganda situasiyasi yaxshiroq bo'ldi til bilan. Ko'proq kishilar tatarcha so'zlashdi Tatarstanda, Qozog'istonda.
Belki, ya.
Chunki mening arxeolog do'stlarim, ular Qozog'istonda ishlaydilar. Ham ularda 90-yillarda Qozog'istonga kelgan, ham shu vaqtda ular AQShda qozoq tili o'rgangan. Hem Kazakistan'a gelip bir kimde Kazakça söyleşmeyi hem ağır AQShga qaytgan hem anda Rus tili öğrengen hem Rus tili bilen anlara Kazakistan'a gelgen. Belki bu da şehir bilen bəyli çünkü avda söyleşerler
başka şeydi.
Almaty'da hazırda köbrek kişiler Rusça söyleşerler. Şoay senin tandao, senin şunday Tatar history topic choice o random buldu ya ki random tugul.
Tatar medeniyeti dip aytırım. Min bilmeyeyim. Bu şınlapta bu 96. yılıydı. Min başta Kazan'da buldum. Dostlar bilen bir Tatar kızı o Kazakistan'dan anda arkivde yaşadı. Hayız İsaki turunda fani hizmet tekşirdi. Hem benim dostum bu çarada o Türkiye'de o Tatarca, Kazakça var Türk telere söyleşe kişir. Biz Sabantoy'a vardık. Sabantoy'da barhok Tatarca söyleşiler hem alar big akşıklar idi. Bu random demek mi bilmiyorum. Çünkü Tatar aşılıkı anda bir rol oynaydı.
Şolay sende Kazak medeniyetke kiriş boldu, Tatar medeniyetke kiriş boldu. Hem sen Tatar medeniyeti tanıdın. Şolay sayladın.
Yok şu men de Kazakistan'da sonurak fəaliyyət hizmet keçirdim ama bu umumen başka
elbette
idi. Başka tema.
Hem sen Kazak tilinden Tatar tiline köçtün.
Ben başta Kazak dili öğrendim 2 yıl Amerika'da, AKŞ'ta. Bunun son Üzbek dili 1 yıl. Hem Türk dili 1 yıl. Hem ben neler mektep için Tatar dili kitabı taptım. Bizim kitaphanada, üniversitede hem biraz okudum. Hem Tatarca söyleşi anladım, başladım. Ama iki üç söz.
No, min de senin gibi aldığından Kazak dilinde söylemiştim. Anlara Tatar dili öğrendim.
Bile.
Bir kızık. Yakın yol bizde. Aspiranturada sen kayda okugansın? Hem kim senin profesör buldu şu vakitte?
Ben başta Wisconsin Üniversitesi'nde idim. Anda yol aşamalığı bilen benim profesörüm idi. Ama Kazak dili boyunca başta. Çünkü o da Kazakça bile. Bu New York'tan bir Tatar tarihçi.
O bütün Türk dillerde söyleşem. Ben keşke onun interview qaradım Kazak dilinde. O menden de yaxşırak söyleşem. Kazakça. Çünkü o hazır Kazakistan'da işley. Nazarbayev Üniversitesi'nde.
İyi.
Anında tema buldu senin birinci tema senin dissertasyada.
Birinci tema bu Tatarca söyleşi almayayım. Yarar. İngilizce söyleşim bulama. Yarar. So I was interested in after the collapse of the Soviet Union, I was interested in what people of different nations shared in common and what was different. Because there was this ideology in Western scholarship that there was a Homo Sovieticus and that all of the different nations had developed into this one sort of Soviet nationality. And I didn't think that was true, but I was curious because I knew the material culture. A lot of the material culture was the same across the entire former Soviet Union. Like women in their 40s all wore the same cashmere sweater or the same piyalı you could find all over the place. And so I wanted to know what was different and what was similar. And what I discovered living in Tatarstan was that that Tatars had very much been Soviet in certain ways, but there was always this pressure on them to give up their language and give up their culture, which were treated as second class. And that during sovereignty, one of the things that happened was that people who preserved Tatar culturally separately in their own little groups came together and connected through Tatar language to create this world that Russian speakers knew nothing about. So for instance, one of the things I observed was I was at an Avuzashul that Marjani's granddaughter was at. And she was teaching, she was very, very old, and she was teaching the younger women how to run the Avuzashul correctly She was like the elder consultant. But this was knowledge, obviously, that she had contained in her family for so many years, and now she was sharing it with these other people.
But this community of people, what were they like at that time? Because if you look right now at Tatar activists, right, I notice a pattern among activists, artists, directors, that very often they came to this work that they're doing through some kind of trauma or pain. So they were very often taking away, for example, Tatar, the language itself, and they were raised Russian speaking, and then they consciously came to Tatar. And it's not just like several people, it's a constant observation that I keep having. And it's like very interesting because, for example, even in my podcast, people who I recorded my conversations with, very often they're originally Russian speaking and they did not speak Tatar in the first place, but then they learned it as like consciously, they came to it at some point. But at that time, who were those people for whom it was so important to invest in this sovereignty of Tatarstan and like have this community?
Well, there were at least two different generations of activists then. There were the older activists like Rafael Hakim and the people from Tots, Damir Sakov, right, who were creating the groundwork for sovereignty, and the people of their generation who were all from villages because that's where they preserved Tatar language and culture. And they suffered trauma, of course, because when they came to the capital of their republic and they spoke Tatar in public, they were shamed. They were forced to get off public transportation by Russians for, speaking Tatar in public. They couldn't do their university classes in Tatar language. They had to learn. They'd studied Russian in school, but never used it as a language in daily life. And suddenly they were expected, without any help at all, to function completely in Russian. And I think that was, no question, traumatic. And then, of course, there was their parents were actually the generation of people who suffered during the purges, which, of course, targeted anybody who, I'm talking about 1938, 1930s purges, targeted anybody who might be a threat to the Soviet state, might have another form of organization, might be religious, and so on, right? Or well read in Tatar. It didn't take very much. The younger people, the younger generation, I would actually say there's sort of three. Then there were like students who were in their 20s, some were even in their 30s, and that's sort of the generation of like the yummy music people and Tatar flash mobs and the Tatar karaoke on Khalbula Tukhai's birthday, where they handed out dictionaries, my first 100 words of Tatar to people who didn't speak Tatar, and Tatarcha Silishem badges, people who did.
But now we're talking about beginning of 2000s, right?
Yeah, end of 90s, beginning of 2000s, yeah. And I don't know as much about the trauma that they suffered, but those were native speakers mostly. This new phenomenon I find very, very interesting, actually, what you're talking about, though, because during sovereignty and among a lot of Tatars, I think, there's this fear that if we lose the language, we lose our culture, we become Russian, there's no way back, there's no way of being Tatar without speaking Tatar language. And this is a very Soviet ideology. Some Russians told me when I was doing research, Tatars, they don't dream in Tatar, they only dream in Russian. I don't know why they're doing any of this, right? As if they knew, first of all, and as if you don't speak Tatar, then you're not Tatar, you might as well be Russian. So I think this is a really fantastic phenomenon that this new generation of activists is investing energy in learning to speak Tatar, and that you don't have to grow up speaking the language in order to be an activist.
Yes. But during my conversations with one of the directors, and he's actually a historian also, Ilshad Saitov, he mentioned that at some point the number of people who consciously came to the decision to speak Tatar and the number of people who speak Tatar because it's their native tongue is gonna be equal. And it's gonna be the critical point of this inqiraz, or like end of Tatars in a sense. And I thought it's an interesting thought in a sense.
It's a very interesting thought. He's very smart.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, he is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but also when you are talking about all of these things about being shamed, speaking Tatar in public transport in the city, coming and being expected just to speak Russian, being considered not educated enough if you don't speak very good Russian. It's a very common story for all of the post-Soviet space. If we talk about Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Belarus, republics of Russian Federation, etc. Well, with Tatarstan in the 90s, it was kind of interesting case because Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Belarus, they all became independent. But Tatarstan, having this potential in a sense, it stayed within Russia.
Yeah.
And how this was used in a sense by people, what happened in this intermediate state of having a little bit more freedom, having this sovereignty, but still being not independent in a sense. What did it result into? I think your book really describes this very well in a sense. Yes, especially taking into account that after the period that your book was taking, most of the Putin's oppression politics started to become bigger and bigger. Yeah, that's very interesting.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yes. But from the research kind of point of view, very interesting. And and my other observation and question was that very often when Western researchers come to our space, if they don't have their personal interest, in case with, for example, Professor Shamiloglu, when he's ethnically Tatar, right, he has very personal relation to the thing that he's studying. That Western researchers kind of pick some exotic topics. They come, they maybe sometimes steal someone's research, of locals, and make it more in a Western way and then present it. Sometimes they're very much on the surface in a sense. They don't even learn the language. They just learn Russian, let's say, and look through that prism. But in your case, you really went very deep. And what made you do that in a sense?
Well, how else are you supposed to do it, really? I mean, why did I do that? Well, because I figure you can't learn about a people only through the imperial language. And I know that languages, how people can form ideas and emotions in different languages matters immensely. It's how they perceive the world, and you can't understand how people perceive the world if you don't even know the idioms that they use in their languages. I think, it was hard work doing the research for that book, but also incredible fun because Tatars were so open with me and so generous and so helpful. And because they were stuck in Russia, right, surrounded by Russia on all sides, where Tatarstan is, they were very eager to share their experiences with me to counteract these Russian stories, the Russian prejudices about Tatars, that the Mongolian Tatar came and they ruined the country and raped my grandmother and all of that garbage. that Russians will say about Tatars. And so they were happy that there was somebody. People were very welcoming as soon as I started learning any amount of Tatar. And they made it very easy for me to want to learn more and more and more. So, yeah, too bad for the people who don't bother because they don't have rich experiences.
Yeah, but also you ended up having this very interesting position in a sense because you spoke Russian, but also you spoke Tatar, and you were an external person. So, by both Russian-speaking people and Tatar-speaking people, you were perceived as someone unrelated to Russian-speaking world and unrelated to Tatar-speaking world. And how did you find yourself in this? Because in your book, like, you can really see that sometimes when, for example, the person you're renting your room from, your apartment from, when she was Russian, I think Russian-speaking at least, and
Russian,
and in front of you, she would say some certain things towards Tatars in Russian, which she would not say like in front of Tatars, in a sense. And kind of same with Tatars, the things that they would say in Tatar to you about Russians.
That's funny. I never thought about that. Yeah, I mean, I'm so in the U.S. What happens often because I'm so white looking, so blonde, so Sara, is that white racists will say racist things in front of me and they assume that I agree with them. And when I disagree with them, they get very angry at me. So when Russians did that, I assumed it was the same thing.
But it was not one-sided because with Tatars too.
Oh, sure.
They're very careful, like in terms of things that they say. In front of any Russians present. And it still kind of continues.
I bet it's more so now.
Yeah, even more, I guess. Yeah, because there is like this border between being Tatar and not becoming a Russophobe in a sense, or let's say being Tatar-speaking and not being a Russophobe is very thin. it's
very difficult.
But you told me during one of our conversations that you were called also a Russophobe by other academics.
Never to my face, but I heard from somebody else who had... I think I heard from another Tatar, actually, that I was considered a Russophobe in the scholarly community.
It's Russian-speaking scholarly community? Or?
No, these are English-speaking. These are Americans.
Okay.
I mean, primarily Americans. Yeah, English-speaking. In the U.S., yeah.
But why do you think so? Like I would understand that very easily from a Russian-speaking perspective because discussions about Russian imperialism, the role of Russian oppression in Tatarstan, in Kazakhstan, wherever, it's still a big taboo topic. If like in Kazakhstan right now it's becoming more and more, right, after this beginning of the war, less marginalized in a sense. People are less afraid to say things. Then in Tatarstan it's still a big taboo in a sense. By why English speaking community? Well,
there's this horrible thing that happens at least in American academia where studies of the former Soviet Union, former Soviet countries, which I hope is changing now since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But what they would do was they would see Russians as backwards and barbaric and so on in comparison to Americans, right? Like, so we're normal, they're exotic and bad. But then whenever they would look at any non-Russian peoples in former Soviet countries, they would assume that they would take the Russian sources at face value, as if there were no imperial or chauvinistic or no tendencies in that work, as if it was their own point of view, and then see those other people as the barbarians.
Yeah.
It's just this kind of triangulation of imperial imperialist thought, which is really horrible. So I think that people thought I was too biased towards Tatars. In anthropology, there's this myth, and I've studied anthropology, there's this myth that you're supposed to remain neutral towards the people you study so that you don't cover up the bad things about their culture. You're honest in your analysis. And I think I was seen as not neutral and therefore anti-Russian.
But I think, in a sense, that maybe those people are perceiving the part of your research that is very emotional as something very subjective. Like you went too deep into understanding of what Tatarness is, in a sense.
I did my job too well.
Yes, you did your job too well, in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there is, this, in a sense, perception that when you do research, you should be as objective as possible. Try to go away from, as you said, hiding out things and being just very honest, not having too much attachment to the topic that you are researching, so that you kind of keep it that way. But it's kind of impossible to go too deep in the topic if you don't get emotional involvement and like try to understand the traumas that people went through, the things that they're talking about. Yes.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, people in academia in the US don't know anything about Tatars, but at the time I remember one of my advisors, not Yula Shamiloglu, obviously, saying, "Oh, tartar, that's the sauce I like with my fried clams." That was her response.
She was from academia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just get this
Which is
a lot on Tinder. Like when the guys see that I'm Tatar, they're like, "Oh, that's a sauce."
Yeah, it's the level for Tinder, but not for she's she has scholarly objectiveness and I don't, or objectivity and I don't, and she can say something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So, I didn't have the right kinds of biases, I guess.
But I think you really took like the colonial approach in that sense already at that time, while people are, I guess people are trying to do it, were trying to do it for a long time, but now it's becoming more and more discussed in a sense. Like Alfred Bustanov, for example, the Siberian Tatar scholar, Islamic scholar, he is talking a lot about, he is doing mostly Islamic studies, studying the manuscripts, and he's doing a lot of research on Muslim subjectivity. So he takes diaries or poems written or commentaries and trying to understand the emotions behind what was there. And it's super interesting. And also the meaning of the script that is being used. And that kind of puts in a lot.
I have to, I should say though that one of my best professors in terms of doing research was actually an American historian of Russia who does decolonial work too, but despite the fact that she only speaks Russian and works on Russian sources, she didn't condemn my reading of, say, Tatarstan newspapers. I actually worked on that chapter with her. So it's not just one kind of reaction, but anthropologists thought I shouldn't be so involved.
That's very interesting.
Very weird. Yeah.
And because now you're an independent researcher, right? You're not affiliated with any...
Not for 20 years, yeah.
Yeah, and that was a conscious decision because you...
Yes and no. There are very few academic jobs. And I'm happier not being there. I don't know if I'm an independent... I still do research, but I also do creative writing, and that makes me very happy. So I'm not just a researcher. I need to make art too.
Yeah, I will put the links for Helen's books.
I only have one out, but that'd be great.
More are coming. But since you are an expert in a sense, right, in Tatarstan, let's say in that time period, whatever, but in general also you're very familiar with history of Tatarstan, Tatar culture, and you're also, and like you worked a lot with Kazakhstan, with Kyrgyzstan, other Central Asian states. What kind of, in your perception, modern perception, let's say, not like history-wise, because we know that Tatars and Central Asia had lots of relationship. Do you see lots of connection, like
between Tatars and Central Asians?
Yeah.
Yes and no. It's a hard question to answer. I mean, recently, of course, there was this initiative that you spearheaded to help people fleeing mobilization into the Russian army. And that was super interesting because, well, first of all, I thought it was super interesting that people were writing in Tatar mostly, or writing Tatar mostly on the channel, even though Tatar has low status in Russia. But I also found really interesting that the people using that channel said that once they got to Kazakhstan, if they said a few words in Tatar to Kazakhs, they were really warmly welcomed because they differentiated themselves from the Russians who were coming as relocanti. Which Kazakhs also, I don't want to create any conflicts. Kazakhs also volunteered a lot to take care of relocanti who were ethnic Russians, but also some felt nervous about the presence of all of these Russian men on the streets, sort of wandering around, milling around. And I thought that was really interesting, and that the Tatar communities in various cities came out and volunteered to help all of these Tatars who showed up in Kazakhstan. There was something else I was going to say. Oh, I was just going to point out that among these people there were people who were wondering how they could get Russian passports because they didn't have them. They were able to cross the border with just their internal passports, and so it means that these are people who've never really left home. And I know that this experience of being with other Turkic people who speak a related language and are also Muslim is going to change them in really interesting ways.
Yeah, I just feel sometimes that Tatar world is a little disconnected from Central Asian, although Central Asia is very Turkic speaking and the languages are super similar. But in case, if we say in Central Asia, Tatarstan is perceived as a brother state in a sense, like people know about it. In Tatarstan, people, I guess, because of Russian propaganda and in general Eurocentric use of Russia, they perceive Central Asia as something backwarded. Not something like cultural-wise close to them, but they're like, Russians are better, but be more Russian than search for these connections with Central Asia. And yeah, it definitely started to change within the war.
You know why that is, though, right? You know, it's a result of Soviet propaganda,
of course,
that cast nomadic people as backwards and discouraged pan-Turkish. I mean, you could be shot for saying anything pan-Turkic, starting in, I don't know, 1918 probably. Yeah, so it's people absorb what's around them. Yeah, and then Tatars can think that they're superior to other Turkic people, like the Bashkorts, for instance, right? No, they're related to, and they're their neighbors, and so on. So
the language is super similar.
Yeah.
Yes, but I see more and more connections between Tatars and Central Asia, at least around art-wise, maybe research-wise.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, very, very nice to see that.
Yeah, this is also a difference with your generation as opposed to the people I knew when I lived in Tatarstan. They recognize their own suffering in other people.
Yes, exactly.
And their own trauma in other people, and this brings them together. They don't fight over, we suffered, they want that attention. They actually come together and see see what they share together, and it's really awesome.
Exactly. And it's like my generation, for them it's something new. When they find the similarities, because they were raised in modern Russia, I would say. And yes, for them it's more of a perception of Central Asia. It's something where immigrants come from to clean our streets, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
But for all the generations, even in Ukraine, actually, because when I traveled throughout Ukraine, and I would always say like Tatar from Kazakhstan, all the generations would always know what is it, where is it, who they are, like who we are. But younger generations, no, like not really, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, very interesting. But war changed a lot. Yeah, maybe different question. You finished your book, so your research is done. Let's say on.
It was published in 2011, long ago. Yeah,
long time ago.
Yeah, and then there was no. It was almost like I didn't write it because sovereignty was dead, and it looked like there was, it was going to be stuck. Tatarstan was just going to be stuck in the same Russian sea forever.
Mm-hmm. But did you have many connections with Tatarstan, like ever since you finished your book?
I haven't had that many because I haven't wanted to get people in trouble.
Already at that time it was like your book, but your book was not like banned.
I don't think it was banned. I don't know, but yeah. No, I guess people there have read it, but I didn't know. I mean, because I write things about Putin threatening to create another Chechnya out of Tatarstan and Bashkortostan if they don't comply with what he wanted for both republics to give up sovereignty. And so, yeah, I didn't want to get anybody in trouble.
And then your revival, in a sense, of your connections started last year. No?
Yeah.
Was it with this Alisa concert, or was it when you met Dina?
Maybe first when I met Dina, yeah. And then she told me I should get in touch with you, and then you and I met, and then there was Alisa. Yeah.
It's very interesting because we met with Helen on the concert of Super Alisa when she came to Berlin. And for me, it was also a very random decision. And then we met lots of different people who are very interesting in terms of their Tatarness, in a sense. Yeah. But what is for you Tatarness, in a sense? How do you see it?
It's such a hard question to answer. I thought about that before you came. I think it's some very basic things like ashukluk and sabrluk. Also a very, very strong society of very strong women, very strong matriarchs. It's the only place I've heard of where women are in charge of the fast-breaking feast during Ramadan. And when I tell other people this, they don't believe me, but I saw it with my own eyes. But it's also and so there's a certain kind of openness and the harmony that you have when you make ishbishmak together, and a kind of inclusiveness and elasticity in terms of the culture, because traditional Tatar culture is considered to be conservative, village, but of course culture is flexible and malleable, and it can change over time, and there's no need for like Tatar look. What is it? I don't know. It's something that where there's certain core values that can change depending on the context and the place and the people.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because I think about it a lot and I ask people.
And what do they say?
All different things. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because I get very often not just questions but responses from people who say they're not Tatar enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say there is nothing like I'm not Tatar enough. If you think you're Tatar, that's all. And it's not there is not a certain list of things that you should follow, or that should make you, in a sense, because for everyone it's very different. Like for me, the deepest one is because I was raised very far away, right, from majority of Tatars. It was just singular things that were happening in my life. It was usually funerals or sabantoy. Two things. Yeah, so I remember very well all the funerals where people around would speak Tatar and Tatar community would gather, but also sabantoys. But sabantoys were more like everyone would celebrate it, not just Tatars, but Tatars would be just the core of it. And for me, the thing that goes very deep is Tatar dancing music. Mm-hmm. So when I hear it, I just want to dance. Mm-hmm. And I try to, of course, as a kid, I would try to kill this feeling because dancing is sometimes shamed in public, of course, but I always get this feeling inside. And for me, it kind of makes me Tatar in a sense, makes me feel like I am Tatar.
Mm-hmm. In the 90s, when I was in Tatarstan, Tatars would say that it's Mungsuluk. But some of them recognized Hmong in other people. But the important thing, of course, was that Russians couldn't recognize Hmong. Mm. The head of the local klezmer band, who was a Yiddish speaker from Belarus, he was evacuated during the war, he knew what Hmong was, and he talked to me about it, without me bringing it up. Mm. But Tatars always said it's something that Russians can't understand. But I think I think being Tatar has something to do with imagining realities that may not exist in present, which is not exclusive to Tatars. But I have this one example, which is, so I'm left-handed. And being left-handed in Russia, of course, is terrible. People think that it's really bad to be left-handed. And one time I was taking a tram to go to an interview when I was in Kazan. I was taking a tram and I hadn't prepared questions. So I was writing questions in a notebook as I stood in the tram going down the hill. And this old Russian man saw me and he started yelling at me for not having silivolya. And the funny thing is that whenever Tatars would see me writing with my left hand, they would say, "Oh, it's a sign of a talented person." Now, they grew up in an environment where being left-handed was just as bad. And if you want to relate that to religion, both Christianity and Islam think that left-handedness is bad. But these Tatars could imagine, they could live according to a set of values that they weren't surrounded by. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? They could imagine worlds that were different from the ones that they were in. Maybe that's also something that makes them very good diasporal nation. Yeah. Being very adaptive and perceive things, but also keep the way they are living their life in a sense. Yeah. Yeah. And now we are actually talking more about Tatarness, not about Tatar, not just in perspective of Tatarstan, but in perspective of Tatar as people. Yeah. But also people are so concerned right now about dying, Tatars dying, Tatar language dying. Yeah. Yes. What are your thoughts? Well, as an anthropologist. Well, first of all, Tatar has survived 500 years of Russian rule. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. But I think that things are pretty critical right now. Because the Russian imperialism is so pervasive and aggressive in Tatarstan. I mean, not just in Tatarstan, but there's very powerful propaganda. I'm sure you saw that video of the kids in the Tatar gymnasium saying "Ya Ruski." I mean, not that means that they suddenly think they're Russian forever, but it's a very that's brainwashing. But as you know, I think that Russia can't continue in the state that it's in for very long. Not that I want people to suffer collapse and suffer poverty and chaos and violence and everything, but I don't think Russia can sustain itself the way it is for very long. And I'm hoping that the algebra of the thing works out so that Tatar language can experience a revival. Tatars have control over the Tatar language, or again, soon enough, so that it becomes a language that kids want to learn and speak.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, I don't want. I lived in Russia in the early 90s, and it was really, even in St. Petersburg, which was relatively rich, people lived really badly. It was really hard on them, and I don't want anybody to experience that again. But I also, yeah.
No, I mean, when people ask me also about Распад России, I always just say, like, as you said, Russia cannot exist in the state it is right now anymore. But what happens after it happens? Like, there is no need to speculate, at least. We can think of different scenarios, but bad things, good things happen.
I think good things could happen.
We will see.
I hope good things happen.
But it's just unavoidable in a sense.
Yeah.
But when, like, as Tatar activists, some people could say, right, why are you doing these things? Who are you doing it for? Etc. And to some extent, in the beginning, maybe before the war, I thought of it, I thought of Tatarstan as a centralized point where it's directed. Of course, it's directed towards Tatars in general, but Tatarstan would be a central point where it could have more impact, in a sense. But now I think of it a little differently. I don't think anymore about Tatarstan as a space where it's directed. I think more of Tatars in general, like world, because world is big and we are many in a sense. And there are probably people like me or like you, for whom it's important. Yes, that is difficult question, difficult thing to talk about. Yeah, and it's just not just Tatars, it's many people of different ethnic groups, with different languages, who suffer.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah, I have this last question about you being a Tatar җанлы кеше. But I think we already answered it a lot. But maybe in connection to that, your chapter with Mon is very popular in a sense. Several people mentioned it a lot. And I think that was actually the first thing I read out of your book. Because I don't remember... I knew about your book a long time ago, but I never actually ended up reading it. But then Mon was the thing that... I think I read it actually from your website. Yes. And how the idea of like writing a separate chapter...
Oh, about Hmong?
Yeah.
Well, people told me Hmong was important and that it was important to understand Hmong, to understand what it is to be Tatar. But also, when I was on that cruise on the Volga River, in Tatarstan, Tatars differentiate themselves at the time would differentiate themselves from Russians because Russians would complain about the weather and I don't know, so on and so forth. But Tatars would find a balance in things, right? So, okay, it's raining and we can't be outside, but the earth needs water in the soil, right? The earth needs water to grow plants. So, you know, the sense of the balance of things in the world, which is actually also very Tatar, but not only Tatar, it's an indigenous perspective that we need to maintain balance. But Tatars practice, when they're social, they practice connectedness, eye contact and smiling and so on. And so, of course, I was struck when I was at this concert and everybody became detached and turned inward and looked sad. And I understood this was a really important thing that I didn't understand what it was that I was observing, but I understood it was important because it was a big shift. So I guess that probably was what made me decide to write a chapter on it, was clearly this matters.
But it's interesting. I didn't know myself about Mon, and my dad doesn't know about it. Yeah, like for my dad, Tatar is his mother tongue, but he doesn't know about Mon.
Maybe it's only people in Tatarstan who do it then. Yeah.
No, I don't think just in Tatarstan, but probably who have a community, I would say, because this kind of things you just get from the community in a sense.
Yeah. And during that concert, after the concert, when people got up to talk about the experience, people stood up and talked about how it made them feel. They talked about things like listening to radio when they were children and how it reminded them of their grandmother, and so it's very much connected to community and family and loss, and people who are no longer with us.
So my feeling when I feel this with dancing music, is it Mon or it's not Mon? Because I don't know.
No, well, I'm not Tatar, so I'm not an authority. but I wouldn't call it Hmong. I would just say it's a connection to. I mean, music can give you all kinds of feelings. Music's all about emotion. So I think it's just a connection to being Tatar. But maybe Stas Sharifulam would have a better answer than me. What do you think?
I don't know. No, for me, just like it's a really weird feeling because it's not like I'm at home listening to Tatar dancing music. It's more like I remember just once I was in Almaty in Park Gorkova, going through it, and apparently there was Sabantuy. I didn't know about it, and there was this music, and I had
it's like me in Park Gorkova in Kazan years earlier.
But I had goosebumps.
Yeah.
And it's like directly, and it's like I want to dance. And it's like no one ever taught me how to dance. I just knew, in a sense. I saw it, of course, and I kind of knew, but yeah.
Because there's Tatar TV in Kazakhstan.
I knew because we always had Sabantus. Our community of Tatars is like 1,500 people to 2,000. But we had Sabantus every year. In Kazakhstan, it happens in every city, I think, in every town, like more or less, which is also interesting. Yeah, very strong community, although very Russian speaking also. Because on this hierarchy, when people are choosing which language their children would speak, they would more often choose Russian.
Yeah. Among Kazakhs too.
Although I met now some people who are raised in Kazakhstan speaking Tatar, and my generation, and they even went to madrasa, or Sunday schools at Meshet. Yeah, very interesting, because very different from my experience. Yes. Yeah. Maybe.
You want to know the first person I spoke Tatar to?
Yeah, that was a long time ago question. You remember?
I do remember it. It was very funny. It was Fendas Safiullin. You know who he was? He was a member of the Tatarstan parliament, and then he was in the Russian Duma.
Okay, no, I don't know.
He was really interesting. So he was a really interesting man because he was in the Soviet military in Afghanistan, and he thought, "Why am I killing my fellow Muslims?" And then he came back and he started. He became involved with Tuts when Tuts came into existence, and he was a pretty important political player. I mean, he was in the Russian Duma. And a really, really sweet man. So I got his number from Damir Ishakov, I think. He said, you should talk to Fandas Safiullin. And I just called his phone number and I made up a sentence kind of in Tatar. You know, I didn't speak Tatar yet. It was 1996 or something, 67. I hadn't studied any Tatar. Yeah, and he invited me to his office for an interview. Gave me Tatar music tapes.
You just came to Tatarstan.
I came in the summer to sort of, for a few weeks, just an exploratory research visit to see.
Cross this border of starting to speak.
Yeah. For me, it didn't feel like a border. It felt like it was something now I worry more about speaking Tatar correctly because it's been a long time. But at the beginning, I was like, let me just play with this and see if I can say something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting, because for me I also don't care, like even now, like I started to care more once I started doing podcast if I say things correctly, but in general it's more like how I feel.
Yeah.
Yes, what I heard, how I feel. Yeah, thank you for this very nice talk. Yeah, zor rahmet sine. And yeah, you are truly a Tatar җанлы кеше.
Rahmet olsun.
Yeah, and I will leave links for Helen's work. You can go and check and yes, ask questions maybe.
Always open to questions.
Rahmet.